Good afternoon, or morning, or evening, depending on where you are. I wanted to have a little break from Dr. Dowie Evans and his interviews, and the title of this video is Follow the Money. But I'll start off with an article, reading some bits from an article that I think is laid out brilliantly, chronologically, what's happened in this case, right from the beginning, in terms of the first suspicions that Dr. Breary really has about Lucy Letby, and then it builds up from there, and it takes it all the way up to all the stages of all through the persecution really, and then the apologies that the consultants give, and then there's a switch around, there's a 180, and then they bring the police in, which still really puzzles me. How that happens so quickly after the sit-down mediation meetings. It's extraordinary. I'm not sure what happened there exactly, but well, it obviously did happen. They brought the police in. So I thought I'd read some excerpts from the article. The article is called The Lucy Letby Case, A Critical Thinking Approach, and it's in an online journal. It might have a physical copy as well, I'm not sure, but it's called Principia Scientific International, and this article is written by Professor Gloria Moss. I believe she's a sociologist by training, and has a lot of published work. So I'll just read some parts that I thought stood out in terms of this build up towards a motivation to bring the police in, really. Which will lead on to another motivation, which is based on the following the money idea. It's there from the beginning in a way, I think. The money side of it. So in June 2016, 2 of 3 triplets, O&P, died. In the same month, there's a meeting of executive directors, I'm reading from the article now, who had concerns about the unit leadership and the fears that the doctors were carrying out a witch hunt, accusing Lucy Letby of being behind the spike in deaths, since she'd been on shift for each incident that the doctors brought to their notice, not the other ones, that they didn't. By July 2016, I've heard various dates about it, but just say July for now, Lucy Letby was moved away from her frontline nursing duties on the neonatal unit, and then she initiates a grievance process on the 7th of September. She alleges victimisation, bullying, and making false claims by the consultants. So they made false claims about her, and discrimination by the hospital as a whole. Her union rep emails the hospital bosses outlining grave concerns about her treatment. I'm going to break away from the thing now. I may have probably said this before. Does this sound like someone who's a serial killer, who's just found that things are getting very hot for her? There's a whole bunch of people senior to her suspecting her of causing harm. The rumour mill's going crazy. Does it sound like that? Somebody's going to initiate a grievance process to shine ultimate light on everything, and to get these people that have been persecuting her even more angry towards her. Is that the ideal thing you'd do if you want to carry on in your career as a murderer and not get caught? It's not, is it? So yes, the grave concerns about her treatment, and the union rep wants to know the grounds for the investigation into her, and why has she been moved from her nursing duties. She's a very competent, very good, very caring nurse. Why have they done it? Post-mortems performed for 6 of the 7 deaths for which Lucy Letby was ultimately convicted recorded natural causes. The doctors who had raised concerns about her being a baby killer, including Dr. Breary and Dr. Jayaram, I think they're the main two, to be honest, from what we know and what we assume, were interviewed along with their union representatives, where an investigator grilled them about Letby's bullying Lucy Letby. It just says Letby there, I don't like saying somebody's surname like that. about Lucy Letby's bullying complaint. 10 hospital staff were interviewed as part of Lucy Letby's complaint. 10. And many had threatened to call the police. I don't know what many is. If she was allowed back on the ward. Not everybody agreed with them, however. This is something new. One senior nurse gave evidence saying that the doctors were operating, quote unquote, a witch hunt. I wonder who that nurse was. I'm not saying who it was, but, you know, Karen Rees certainly was in Lucy's corner and would meet her for the 2 years subsequently that she was in that admin job before she was arrested. I don't know if it is her. It just says senior nurse. This senior nurse added, I hope she returns to the unit. We would be delighted. On the 12th of November, that's 2016, that must be, the grievance investigation was completed. It found no evidence to justify calling in the police. In fact, it found that the doctors were at fault for suspecting her of murder, writing that, quote, this behaviour has resulted in you, this is addressed to Lucy, a junior colleague and fellow professional feeling isolated and vulnerable, putting your reputation in question. The grievance inquiry told Letby, that's the inquiry that told her that. And it went on to say this is unacceptable and it could be viewed as victimisation, which it obviously was. The report stated that the hospital would aid her professional development by supporting her with a master's degree on an advanced neonatal course. She was offered weekly welfare meetings with a senior nurse. That happens, doesn't it? Where you've got a murderer and they're offered they're going to pay for a master's course. Because, anyway, documents show hospital managers proposed offering her an observational role at Alder Hey Children's Hospital. I wish she'd have got out of there and gone to that hospital instead. But anyway, this is where we are now. In Liverpool, I think that's a level 3 unit, the most intensive care, as well as support for a potential master's degree or advanced nurse training. 3 days later, HR and senior nurses discussed Lucy Letby's possible return to the neonatal unit 3 days before Christmas 2016, but she doesn't get a chance to come back until quite a way into 2017, so there's this big gap. Tony Chambers, who was the chief executive at the time, who somebody told me that he'd, I've not looked at the proof of it, but that he trained as a nurse. He's the one that warns the paediatricians. His background is nursing, so it makes you wonder whether he had an affinity with more with nurses and how they can be treated by doctors in this imperious and, well, it's much more an imperious way here. It's persecution, but that's what I heard, that he trained as a nurse, this chief executive, who later leaves the trust. Tony Chambers issued her with a full apology on behalf of the hospital trust. She offered her a role at Alder Hey. He assured her family, because her father was very much behind helping Lucy build the grievance process, take her through it, help her, support her, which is a very good thing. Other people have even criticised the family for that. Like, this is a woman, she's in her mid-20s at this point, well, 26. And even if, it doesn't matter what age she is, what's wrong with having your family trying to support you through a very, very difficult period? It's just symptomatic. I'm going off the thing here, but it's symptomatic of how people turn everything into something wrong about Lucy or her family. It absolutely pisses me off, to put it mildly. He assured her family that the doctors who had victimised her, it's very strong, isn't it? And I think it's true, would be dealt with. And according to one of the doctors, Dr. Breary, this is what Dr. Breary says later, the doctors were told that a line had been drawn. That's by Chambers told him that, according to Breary. And that quote, Breary's quoting now, we were not to cross that line, and if we were to cross that line, there'd be consequences. The doctors were forced to sign the apology letter. I'll put a link to this fantastic article. It's so clear in the chronological way it deals with this, and very clear writing, I think, which helps. By November 2016, that must be, the RCPCH reports expressed concern about the unit staffing and safety. A lot of issues there, yeah. that came out, stating that it was unsuitable for level 2 care, but it had been downgraded back in July anyway. So they'd kind of jumped before they were pushed. They jumped before they were pushed and they knew they were going to lose that status of a level 2. I really like how clear this is. It and the way it sets it out piece by piece. It's a very clear thinking mind behind writing this. I'll link it below. In January 2017, the hospital held an extraordinary board meeting at which the board, chaired by Sir Duncan Nicol, was updated on the RCPCH review. Nicol was head of the NHS at the time of the Beverley Allitt scandal. Allitt was the nurse found guilty of injecting infants with insulin and air bubbles in 1993. Anyway, see, the medical director, Dr. Ian Harvey, stated that the report had found the incidents were down to issues. The incidents, so I'm supposing that's meant to be the spike in deaths. The incidents are down to issues of leadership, escalation, and timely intervention. I'm assuming that's what that means. And then it does not highlight any single individual. So it's saying it's systematic problems within the neonatal unit. He said that some case reviews were continuing but were not expected to change that finding. In other words, they weren't going after one person to blame everything on, unlike some people. The doctors were not invited to the board. And a victim impact statement from Lucy Letby's grievance was read out. Quote, there was an unsubstantiated explanation that there was a causal link to an individual, Chambers said, the ex-chief executive at the time. He told Nicol he was seeking an apology from the consultant. So he's really supporting Lucy there. Good on him. By now, doctors Breary and Jayaram, along with 5 other clinicians, were being backed into a corner. That's the 7. I always wondered who they were. We hear about the gang of 4, which will then include Gibbs, the senior guy who's barely there. So we hear. And Dr. B, the one that's anonymous. But then there's obviously another 3. And that's what Breary says in an interview. He says that he said to Karen Rees, the nursing manager, are you gonna going against the advice of 7 consultants, are you? We don't know who those other people are. They've just joined forces, haven't they? They've just teamed up. They've ganged up in a bigger gang, not just the 4, the 7 there. In January, they met with Chambers. Right, that's the meeting. And Harvey were told things had been said and done that were below the values and standards of the trust. Managers also demanded mediation between Lucy Letby and Doctors Breary and Jayaram. It's always those 2, isn't it, mentioned? And Dr. Harvey told them it would protect them from a referral to the General Medical Council, GMC. The stakes are high for them. They're on the verge of being complained about to their body that they are registrants. They're registered to that body, aren't they? The doctor's watchdog, as it's described here. The BMA union rep, BMA, I don't know, it should be GMA, shouldn't it? I think it's a typo. The GMA union rep told them, while there were disturbing similarities to Beverley Allitt, they should agree to write Lucy Letby an apology letter, which they reluctantly agreed to. And Breary didn't agree to do a face-to-face meeting, but Jayaram did. Breary wouldn't do it. In late January 2018, they wrote to Chambers asking for a full investigation. Right. What is the reason for the unexpected and unexplained death? So they're not letting it go. What should we as paediatricians do now? Apparently that was their question of him. Well, maybe you should look at what the RCPCH report says about all the failings. You should maybe consider that there's been a major problem with sepsis there. You should maybe want to make it an open fact within the organisation that there's been terrible issues with the drainage which may have caused this outbreak of sepsis across these 2 years. It's like they don't want to go there, do they? They don't want to go there. And also the individual failings of the individual doctors, of which there are many. What's the reason? On February the 5th, Sunday Times reported that deaths in the baby unit at the hospital were being investigated. So that's not a police investigation, because that happens, that only first becomes mentioned that it's a police investigation on the 18th of May, but the police actually, so we hear, have a meeting with Jayaram and Breary on the 27th of April of 2017. In a letter to Lucy Letby dated the 1st of March, all the paediatricians apologised, stating, "We are sorry for the stress and upset that you bastards that you have experienced in the last year." Later, Dr. Susan Gilby, who replaces Chambers as chief executive at the Countess of Chester Hospital at the end of 2018, reported that the medical director of the hospital, Dr. Ian Harvey, had urged her to report Dr. Breary and his consultants to the General Medical Council. So they were close for going to those doctors, going for them, for the way they'd treated Lucy Letby. But she obviously didn't do that. In July 22, here's the irony. Well, so yeah, here's the sort of irony. July 2022, she complains of bullying by the ex-BBC accountant chairman, who's been appointed in 2021, Mr. Haythorne Thwaite. That's a great name, isn't it? And she subsequently resigns, the new chief executive, claiming constructive dismissal. It's a culture of bullying. It's a culture of bullying there. And there's many other examples of that are mentioned en route, and we'll do again, and extra ones. I want to start going through a series of newspaper articles around that time and slightly before the 2015 period, and after as well, in relation to give you a general sense, and many of you will know this already who've been following the case, of the wider problems, the continual problems, the problems before and after this period where the police get involved. Before and after Lucy Letby is deemed to have done all these crimes, that there's systemic problems there, major problems with the treatment of babies and negligence across the board. So I'll just go through some of these now, and I'll put all the links below to all these articles so you can read them all in their totality. The first one here is titled, it's from the Daily Mail Online, and it's Police Probe Deaths at the Countess of Chester Hospital. This is from This is when it first comes out. So that's publicly that the police are involved. That's 18th of May 2017. In that article, quote here, Justine Jones, a clinical negligence lawyer for Slater and Gordon of Chester, who is representing the parents of several babies who died, said the hospital has taken the highly unusual step of calling in the police to investigate these deaths, which will come as a shock to the families. Clearly, as I said before in other videos, people will know if they looked into it, you've got a clinical negligence lawyer representing several families before the police ever get involved. It's in the offing that they're going to move on it. They're going to move on these deaths in terms of negligence claims. And where's that going to go? So we're starting into the follow the money aspect. We've already been there really in terms of those consultants wanting to protect their status, and not so much the management at that stage because they're backing Lucy. But equally, they're not really investigating what's happened with the plumbing and the drainage, are they? There's none of them really want to go for really explaining what has happened, is it? Yeah, they've taken the hit and say it's gone down to a level 1 now. They're aware of all the recommendations and the faults that were found through the RCPCH report. But nobody's really going for what the problems could have been that's caused that spike in death. Nobody wants to go there because it leads to following the money. It leads to massive potential payouts that you're going to have to make for negligence claims, and that you don't know where the parameters of that are, and that's one of the reasons I'm doing the video, because of the potential expanse of parameters there beyond anyone's imagining really, which adds another motivation to create a serial killer story. In the end, not just for those consultants, but the whole of the NHS, not just for that Chester hospital, but the whole of the NHS. I'll explain why I'm saying that in a bit. From that same article of in May, 18th of May 2017, there's a story within a story about a poor baby Noah, who died in the hospital at Chester in 2014. I'll just read it. Melanie and Patrick Robinson's baby Noah, died after a series of blunders at the Countess of Chester Hospital in 2014. So that's nothing to do with Lucy Letby. This is about medical doctor blunders in the year before they start looking at Lucy Letby. Noah was born by caesarean section 12 weeks early on March the 20th, weighing just £1 7 ounces, after Mrs. Robinson developed potentially fatal preeclampsia. Despite his size, he was given a good chance of survival. But an inquest heard he died less than 4 days later after doctors, not nurses, not Lucy Letby, doctors mistakenly put a breathing tube into his gullet, which connects to the stomach. It should have gone into his trachea. They also, not the nurses, the doctors now, ignored 5 warning signs from x-rays and other equipment, which they wrongly assumed were faulty. So they rather assumed that the x-rays were faulty and the equipment was faulty and what they were doing was right, and missed 5 opportunities to correct the problem that they created there. Mrs. Robinson said there was only one senior doctor on duty when Noah began to deteriorate on March 22, and this is 2014, remember. Recording a verdict of misadventure, I don't know why they use that term, but I suppose there's technical reasons, but yeah, what else can it be? I mean, is it not deliberate murder? It's not. I don't know what threshold you need to get to corporate manslaughter, but it's probably been quite close to it through negligence. But misadventure obviously opens it out into a negligence case as well, I think, because of the reasons they cite. The coroner Nicholas Reinberg told the inquest in Chester in February 2015, quote, "There were very considerable signs that the tube was incorrectly positioned, and I find it surprising that these signs were not realised. He said an assumption that the equipment was faulty, the assumption made by the doctors again, the ones that are still working in 2015 and 2016 when they're blaming Lucy Letby for everything. He said he finds that the assumption that they made 5 times, was extraordinary." Jumping forward a bit now in time, we're talking about a baby called baby Oscar. Now the death of baby Oscar happened in September 29, so this is after Lucy Letby's been arrested. But what's happened there is that an inquest was held. I'll put the link up for all these. This link it's from something called rotherus.co.uk. I think it's a legal firm rather than a newspaper. It's called Inquest to be Held into the Death of a Baby Boy at the Countess of Chester Hospital. An inquest will be held this week beginning Monday, August the 22nd. I've heard through other sources that they were trying to stall this inquest. They were trying to stall it, meaning the trust trying to stall it, because they didn't want, in the middle of the trial for Lucy Letby, they didn't want in the news coming out some big judgment at an inquest saying that there'd been medical negligence at the hospital, while at the same time they're trying to pin all these deaths on Lucy Letby. So the death happened in 2019 of baby Oscar, but it took 3 years to get to the inquest. So Oscar Somerton died just hours after his mother Freya gave birth at the Cheshire Hospital in September 2019. His mother, 34, and a teacher, and Oscar's 40-year-old father. They say that they're now seeking answers from the inquest as to why their son died. I'm not sure of the result of that inquest. I thought I'd found a link to it the other week, but I can't find it at the moment. I'm not sure if it's still going on in terms of a negligence claim. I don't know. The family's solicitor, Greg Armand, from the law firm Rotherus. Yeah, so this report is from Rotherus. I'll put the link. It's been almost 3 years since Oscar's tragic death, so that's that trust dragging it out. That's the NHS lawyers dragging it out. You'll see another sign of that in a minute in another report I mentioned about this dragging out nature or fighting off these negligence claims with lawyers, with lawfare. It's been almost 3 years since Oscar's tragic death, and his family hope the inquest will now give them answers. The inquest will be held over 4 days, and it says where is it, in Warrington. So I'm not sure about the final result of that, or whether that's going to result in a negligence claim, or if that's still ongoing. So we move into another article here from Cheshire Live, which is the cheshirelive.co.uk. And that's just stating that in mid-February 2015, so this is the first attacks that Lucy is alleged to have carried out is in June 2015. But we've got a report here from Cheshire Live, one of the local papers or journalist media outlets, I should say, from mid-February 2015. And the title of that is, I'll put the link again down below, is "A Blip in the Death Rate at the Countess of Chester Hospital Triggers a Review." So they're having a review about a blip in a heightened death rate 5 months before. And this is the hospital as a whole. It's not specifically the neonatal ward, but it's deaths across the whole hospital. So they're having problems with heightened, increased death rates, so much so that a review is called. Honing back now into the period in question in terms of what the trial covered, the period of 2015 and 2016, just a reminder, I think I've mentioned it before, that Countess of Chester Hospital was the fifth worst performing hospital in relation to the appropriate treatment of sepsis across the whole country, right at the bottom of the table, in terms of identifying it or treating it within guidelines and protocols. I'm dotting around in time here, so before this 2015-2016 period and after it, to show that the problems that they're blaming all on Lucy, they were there before in different ways, and they're there after in many different ways as well. That have you believe that it was everything was fine, before and after, but we're showing you here that it's not. So this is again from Cheshire Live. I'll put the link below. Chester Hospital downgraded to requires improvement. Now this is May 2019 report. The CQC, the Care Quality Commission, did an investigation, or did their normal visit in late 2018, and they came up with this report, and it downgraded the whole hospital from a good rating to requires improvement. It has to make you wonder how they got the good rating in the first place. So it just says here, there's some really interesting bits I picked out, but I'll put the link to the whole article. Care Quality Commission inspectors found a number of improvements were needed during their visit in November and December 2018. So Lucy Letby has been arrested at this point. And she's been arrested. Key findings in the report, the CQC report, under safety were identified as, again, the hospital did not effectively demonstrate a consistent approach to sepsis. How many of the children keep being queried for sepsis? And this is 2019. Didn't effectively demonstrate a consistent approach to sepsis, identification and treatment, but an action plan is in place. Well, but if you've got to have an action plan, you haven't dealt with it, have you? And the second point I pulled out there is urgent and emergency care department did not have sufficient paediatric nurses to meet the Royal College of Paediatric Child Health standard of 2 children's nurses per shift. This is in 2019. I won't go through all these articles in depth, it would just be too long, but I'll put all the links below and give you the headlines for these. So this is a report from Cheshire Live again, local, from July 2022, just last year. And get a load of this. So The Countess of Chester Hospital, this is the headline, Countess of Chester Hospital Trust ranked among England's worst, one of the worst hospitals in the country, who just so happen to also have a serial killer that you can blame problems on. But everything is, and this is 2022. This is just before the trial starts, and it's the worst hospital in the country. It says here, Chester ranked among the worst hospitals in the country. It failed on every metric. It failed to meet every single one of its targets. And that's in 2022. Dr. Brewery's still working there though, apparently. Maybe Dr. B, I don't know. Probably some of the other doctors that went after Lucy, they're still there. Dr. Jayaram left. We don't know why. Going back in time a bit now, just trying to show you both sides of both bits of the, can't think of an analogy, both sides of it in terms of time. So going back to July 2013 now. So Lucy Letby starts at the hospital in 2012. So this is just a report from Cheshire Live again, which is a brilliant resource. I'll put the link below. The headline is that the hospital, the Countess of Chester Hospital, has spent £11 million in fighting clinical negligence claims. That's not paying out the claims. That's just fighting them. That's the level of how much money they're giving to NHS lawyers that they're hiring just to fight the claims off, not to pay anyone, just for the lawfare, just for that. They're not payments to people because of negligence. They're just fighting the claims. 11 million, and that's from 2013. And we move on to another link here that I found. Can't find the date here, but somebody, when I saw it again on Reddit as well, I mean, it's an actual, this is from a legal firm. It relates to a payout of an 8.5 million settlement. Follow the money. 8.5 million settlement in medical negligence claim against the Countess of Chester Hospital because of the poor medical treatment, the failures, the negligence of not the doctors, not Lucy Letby, not the nurses. I'll say that again. Not the nurses, not Lucy Letby, but the doctors, resulted in this £8.5 million settlement. And it's Field Fisher is the name of the law firm. I'll put that link below. It's suggested that it's probably from the 2022 period or if slightly before, because somebody tried to search it and they can't find anything from before, but it's not dated. But it is subsequent to Lucy Letby leaving. It's that the negligence was so serious that the child ended up with cerebral palsy and brain damage. So yeah, so that's a series of articles giving you a sense of what's going on. So taking all those in kind of context, I began to think, well, you know, even if you took out the deaths in the 2015-2016 period that Lucy Letby has been blamed for, that leaves another 10 deaths, which is a spike in and of itself. You know, that's a spike in and of itself, and they could be looked into for medical negligence. Or in fact, all 17 could be if there isn't a serial killer story. If there's not a murderer you can blame it on, you've got potentially 17 cases, or maybe 14, because it's a massive jump anyway. Even if you take out the deaths that Lucy's been blamed for, it's a jump of up to 300%. No, about 250%. Anyway, so they've got a lot to protect here, massive amounts to protect, and it's building and it's growing. You know. I'm looking at this chart here that I don't know if don't think I can put a picture in the video. I don't think I can do that. Well, I haven't worked out how to do that yet. But anyway, I'll just tell you about it. There isn't a link because it's a Freedom of Information request. But it's very interesting. It just shows the deaths of neonates and stillbirths going from 2013 to 2018, showing this increase in 2015 and 2016 of neonate deaths. But also, you know, it's gone from a level 1 to a level 2 as well, and then it drops away from a level 2 to a level 1 in July 2016, so you've got to think about that as well. But what's really interesting, the highest rate of death, this spike in 2015 for early neonates, that's neonates from 0 to 6 days, in that same year, it's got the very high rate of stillbirths in the hospital, the highest across those 5 years looked at. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 years looked at. The highest stillbirths, and also the highest of late fetal loss as well. So in the year when there's a spike in the deaths of early neonates, it's also the highest year out of those 6 for stillbirths. I mean, nobody's accusing Lucy Letby of those. And late fetal loss. It's suggesting there's something systemic wrong in the hospital that's peaking in that period, doesn't it? Strangely, in 2016, the stillbirths goes right down. And then in 2017, it goes right up again. Right up again, almost to what it was in 2015. So that's extraordinary. 2015, what have I put here? Yeah, the highest rate of late fetal loss and 2013 was high as well. But then weirdly, late fetal loss, it drops really low in 2016, and there are none in 2017 and 2018. But it's suggesting that there's a real peak for all these different losses of babies in different ways, whether it's stillbirth or early neonatal or what's the other term? Late fetal loss. Really peaks in 2015 across the board. Is that suggestive of something to do with sepsis or systemic problems in the hospital or the chaotic nature of the hospital? We've got to 2022 way down the line and it's deemed it's one of the worst hospitals. And then back around this time, it's one of the 5 worst hospitals for dealing with sepsis. So in terms of the theme of this video, in terms of follow the money, I just went on an imaginative, I think it's quite logical that once a grouping of negligence claims was successful in a particular period, let's say the police had never come in and that Chester lawyer had started the negligence claims, once there'd been a bit of a class action there, maybe 5, 6, 7 families, I think it would open up similar claims once people hear about it, because there'd all be news stories. Open up similar claims going back before 2015 and also after July 2016. It would go backwards in time and it would go forwards in time. And this is the way I began to think about it, is that not just in the neonatal ward, but also potentially in relation to these very high stillbirths and possibly even the late fetal loss. What's going on in that hospital to be causing these very high rates in those categories, as it were. And then possibly even other areas of the hospital in terms of sepsis control, in other wards, whether it's elderly people or people of any age, whether they've been harmed per se for going at that hospital. It expands outside of the neonatal unit, outside of the maternity side of things. If that, that goes back to that blip in 2015 about deaths as a whole. It could open up that for negligence claims in terms of that the hospital had a insanitary drainage system there that was not fit for purpose and creating these spikes in sepsis, which at the same time they're not following up either. It's a perfect storm, isn't it? It's building. It could then, in terms of that individual hospital, could be the basis for an indefinite number of claims, not just with regard to babies, but for adults as well, and children, older children, and not just neonates. Yeah. Right. You can begin to see another way of looking at the idea of Lucy being moved off the ward now and targeted, and eventually the whole of this trust, and then eventually the whole of the NHS effectively, in terms of it, the spirit of it going after Lucy and deciding that she's to blame for this. Because once she's moved off the ward and brought the police in, then You know, at some point they demolished that whole unit where she worked, a 2-storey unit. There was a ward above with all the pipes dripping into the crawl space above, and all the drainage problems in the unit itself, in the toilet areas where the sinks were, sewage floating, they were walking through sewage. Plumber coming every week at least, you know, the toxic brew as he called it. You know, at some point they did that, they demolished that building. I don't know the exact date, I want to find out the date for that, but it was subsequent to Lucy being moved off the unit, and they replaced the entire 50-year-old at least cast iron drainage system, got rid of it all. Sounds like burying the evidence, doesn't it? Starting again. And meanwhile you've got this focal point of a murderer to sort of take all the heat off your systemic problems as a hospital, not just in the neonatal ward, but further afield, and further back in time and further forward in time as well. So this is where I wanted to take it further and imagine what could happen in terms of the money, the financial impact of this. An indefinite number of claims about that hospital. So you've got a huge amount of negligent claims in relation to rampant sepsis over a many years period, several years, and still not fixed now because of that CQC report, with terrible quality of infection control, bad drainage issues over that particular period of time. It could begin to trigger, it becomes this massive story in the press, and then it can trigger a domino effect for other hospitals. To an extent that's kind of happening already, but to a certain degree. But I think they knew that was potentially going to happen. But not just in terms of neonatal care across the whole country, for the whole of the NHS. Once that story got really big out there in terms of a huge amount of people bringing negligence claims about that really badly run hospital in Chester, it could just spread to other hospitals, to the whole of the NHS. I wrote down notes here. Perhaps all the deaths in all the neonatal wards across the whole country would have to be looked into historically in relation to doctor negligence, iatrogenic harm, that's harm from, you know, the interaction between the doctors or the medication given, or nosocomial harm, which is like infections that you can pick up in hospital, particularly if there's raw sewage about it, and other problems that they're not dealing with and haven't dealt with since. Failure to control infection via appropriate protocols. It's potentially massive. I mean, it could, you know, the staffing levels, unsafe, hospitals working outside of the guidelines, working in a dangerous way actually in terms of the patients they're caring for. I think it could have potentially created a snowball effect across the whole of the NHS. But this is a blocker. This crime, the idea of the crime and the wicked nurse who's doing it all is a blocker to that. At least a temporary one anyway. A temporary one, but it is. And it's a look over here situation, and at construction obviously. It could have created a snowball effect, potentially reaching into billions in terms of money, I think. And that's why I'm calling this Follow the Money. As the motivation, as the reason to create this story, as it became clear to not only those consultants but the whole trust. Which way are we going to do this now? Which way are we going to go with this? I was just linked on Twitter. Somebody, Crystal Rose on Twitter, Crystal Rose, sent me a link to a Guardian article. The title is from 14th of May 2023, very recent obviously. And the title is, so obviously this is when the trial's ongoing, isn't it? 14th of May. Title is Babies Are Dying Because of NHS Failings. Poverty and Equality, Charities Warn, in relation to childbirth. And it goes, I'll link it below, it goes on into all the dangers of in neonatal wards across the whole country. So they stalled it, but it's still there. It's come out, this is a report from 2023 May. It's still there as this bubbling thing underneath, this volcano. It wants to come out. But this particular trust with those ghastly 4 doctors pushing it, or 7, whatever it was, gang of 4, 7. They stalled it discreetly in that particular hospital, but it's there. terms of what's happening in maternity units and on neonatal wards across the whole country. NHS failings, billions of pounds in negligence claims, potentially. Wanted to move now into the actual trial itself and the costs involved in that, and the costs of the Hummingbird Operation Hummingbird, which really in total lasted about 6 years, really, up to the trial, didn't it? And it's still ongoing, actually. It's not closed down because they're still looking for more murder victims. It's just outrageous. So it's still ongoing. But just to get some sense of the money involved there, well, just the CPS figures, I've looked this up online, that the CPS, just to bring the trial, which covers the experts, all those so-called experts, Evans and co, presentational fees, not sure exactly what that is, and the counsel, so this prosecutor character, that's 2.5 million straight away. Then, the police must have spent, I don't think, it's a 6-year thing, they got 70 officers on it, 70 detectives on it over 6 years. They rented separate buildings for it. They were given, they ran out of their budget for the Cheshire Police. They had to be given, for the constabulary, they had to be given extra amounts in terms of millions of pounds to carry on with the Operation Hummingbird and do those flash videos that they've now put on private, It's millions. I mean, that's going to be 5, 6, it could be 7 million more, it could be more for that operation. Massive amounts of money over a 6-year period. So, very conservative estimate, we're up to 7.5 million there. Probably way more. And it's still, there's still money pouring into it because of looking into, and Evans still being paid, looking into it, into other crimes that they can try to pin on Lucy. More money going into it, looking at 4,000 cases, more money being soaked up from that, 8, 9, 10, double figures in the millions already. And this is outrageous, and I'll link it below. The hospital, the Countess of Chester Hospital, I'll link the story, spends, this is awful, £325,000 on public relations for advice. That trust spends that purely for advice about how to handle the Lucy Letby case, as it were. £325,000. That's what they spend on that. So you've got the disparity between all that money that really it's the state, in a sense. It's the police, the CPS, prosecution, the judiciary, the NHS. They've got bottomless pockets relative to what was available to Lucy Letby in terms of the funding through legal aid, and they made a fuss about that, and you had newspaper articles saying she shouldn't have got that amount of legal aid, which is allegedly, it's said to be less than £1 million. Can you see the disparity? And again, follow the money, all those people getting paid, all those people with good earners, everyone involved, the police. I'll go through the list of that in a minute, what I thought about. But yeah, well over 10 million probably in total, and less than 1 million for Lucy. So they can throw everything at it. They can overwhelm. Does that sound like justice, though? Does that sound like justice? The prosecution have all that to bring to bear. It becomes the weight of the state. Somebody put an interesting phrase on Twitter. They said, in relation to this, but also to retrying one of the cases next year, it's the state on full power. The state on full power. And with Lucy's, the amount that she had to spend from legal aid, you've got a situation there with the cost for acquiring an equal set. Well, the experts, the prosecution, they're not good, are they? But I'm just saying that to get the experts would cost the defence a lot of money. And where are they going to get that money from if they got this limited pot? But the prosecutions, it could be anything. They can just rack it up, millions. There's a limit on what Lucy can do to defend herself. But the thing is, it's not just about the payments to the experts for the defence. It's the idea that who are they going to get? Apparently they had 2, I don't know their names, but they didn't call them. Another very curious thing. But in general terms, what experts who are currently working for the NHS are going to want to testify for the defence over a case involving babies and children, very young babies. Effectively against their employer, in a way, in a sense. That's what it is, really. Because what they're going to have to be saying, it was the hospital, what was going on there, your failings that did it. So if you've got these other experts that might work for the defence, are they going to want to do it? You're going to be very hard pushed to find them. And if you want to use private ones or even ones from abroad, if they're allowed to be used in the courts, and you're on a very limited budget, then there's huge costs involved in that. So that has an implication. Talking about the disparity of money available between the prosecution and defence here, which makes it fundamentally, intrinsically and explicitly unjust, clearly. I mean, the bloody NHS Trust spend, getting on for half of what Lucy Letby had for her whole defence almost, 330,000, or, getting a third of it. Just for that, just for a bloody public relations people in London. I mean, it's just disgusting, isn't it? Disgusting. And then there was these articles saying Lucy Letby shouldn't have gotten the legal aid even. It's hideous. Hideous. So there's two conclusions I thought about from that, is that it's this idea of that ever-expanding group of negligence claims, possibly countrywide, but spending maybe even like 9-10 million on this to save potentially a few billion. Is that another follow the money situation? In other words, we'll protect the NHS as a whole here, and we'll sacrifice a nurse, a good nurse, a competent nurse, a caring nurse, to save the NHS as a whole, because this will set, if we really go for Countess of Chester Hospital and negligence claims, it will spread like wildfire across the whole country. Another angle on this spending, potentially up to 10 million as a whole across the police and the CPS and the trust itself, is that as they're spending all this money, these different agencies, they don't really want to let it go at any point. The more money they spend, the less they want to find exculpatory evidence, the less they want to find, oh, actually, we've made a mistake here. Things like they use the green note as a confession note, but which it wasn't at all. Obviously, I'll do a video about that eventually myself. And but there's many hundreds of other notes that Lucy had written, which weren't presented in court, which more than likely had exculpatory phrases on them, which that green note did in and of itself. Obviously, when it says I haven't done anything wrong. In fact, you don't need any more than that, do you? But we're living in an insane world, actually. Insane. So the more these agencies spend, the more the police spend, the more they get extra budgets in, the less they're going to, the more they're invested, their ego and they're wanting to get all this money and this kind of fame, really. They want to win. And the less justice matters to the police and the less justice matters to the CPS. The more the CPS spend on it, the 2.5 million, the less they're interested in actually thinking, oh, Jesus Christ, we've fucked up here, haven't we? It's the hospital, it's not Lucy, it's the hospital. We've got to roll back on this. Oh, we've spent 10 million. Oh, yeah, well, so be it, but justice matters. No, they're not going to do that, and they don't do that. They don't do that. They've invested in it in terms of their status and their ego as well as the money.